Hey guys, my name is VaulSC. Hope that you are doing well. In this video, I'm going to be teaching you some very basic tips, strategy, tactics for Conquest, the last argument of kings, the rank and file strategy tabletop war game by Parabellum. This video is for people who are very new to the game, who want to sort of understand not just the rules mechanics, but what to do when you find yourself on the table looking at your opponent and deciding what to do with your regiments to try and win. The video is for people who maybe have been playing for a few months, 6 to 12 months, who really struggle with the game in terms of the competitive sense. You're really good at painting your miniatures, assembling them, getting to the game, but maybe you just haven't had the chance to really study what to do. So even if you've been playing for a while but just haven't really got off the ground in terms of competing, this may be a helpful video to you. But it's generally for people who are just very fresh and just want to sort of get out of Army Builder, out of the sort of list building stage and onto the tabletop to just really have an understanding of what to do. Those of you guys who are very experienced and are better players than me, you're just absolute experts, this video is not so much for you. You might find it entertaining, but you may also find it useful to link to somebody who is also new. Maybe, you know, you find it easier to show a tutorial to somebody else rather than going through the whole thing yourself. Maybe you find other people's method of education better and more convenient. So with that in mind, I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to be taking you through some really basic stuff, just a little bit about me. I've been playing Conquest for around about 6 months, but I've been playing tabletop war games for about 20 years. And one thing about tabletop war games is that your skills are transferable. Have you ever noticed how somebody can just pick up the game and be an expert at it within like a month? It's just because a lot of the concepts that applied in other games that they played, whether it's Warhammer, Malifaux, Flames of War, Conquest, Infinity, you know, you're coming from one game to another, you're generally going to be good at it if you were good at the previous game. And you know, if you really struggled, then obviously a video like this will really help you to get up to that intermediate level. Right, so the first thing I'm going to start off with is just a little bit about list building. I won't spend too long on list building because really I want to get you thinking about what to do with your regiments when you're on the tabletop. But we will just take a very brief look at Army Builder. Sometimes people ask how many regiments, how many characters is usual, how many is normal. And in my experience, just a really straightforward way to go is to have around about 2 or 3 characters and around about 8 regiments. So in my example list that I'm just putting together right now, I've got Noble Lord, Imperial Officer, and I'm putting in some restricted units back here. And then there's going to be, I don't know, Theist Priest with a group of militia and the bowmen. And so far I've spent 1,200 points, but to bring this up to total, rather than adding new regiments, I'm just going to add some extra stands. For that Steel Legion unit, the militia is going to be a really big block like this. And the Household Guard is going to be a really big block like this. So with the Household Knights, and you can sort of see that the total is coming nearer to 2,000, and that's when you start spending a bit more on unit upgrades and character abilities. So when you have an army list that looks like this, where you've got a few characters and you've got about 8 regiments spread across it, this is normal for 2,000 points, which is the typical tournament size for Conquest. The game can absolutely be played with like 5 or 6 regiments and like 1 or 2 characters. That is doable, but you sort of really have to know what you're doing. The other thing is, it can be played with a massive number of units, especially with 100 Kingdoms. You could go up to like 15 or greater number of regiments, and that is also fine. But the thing to remember is that when you're learning and you're just trying to have a bit more of a focused experience on sort of picking up the basics, sticking to something within the normal amount is better. And when you are planning on your purchases and what miniatures to buy, you know, if you wind up with about 3 or 4 characters and somewhere between 7 to 9 regiments total, then you're doing it about right, and you can have a really decent game that is going to teach you quite a lot and give you a good chance of winning. So that is just generally my response to people who just aren't sure, you know, how big or small their army list needs to be. Now next up, the other thing you might like to plan when you are working out your army list and planning your army is just which character is realistically going to be your warlord. So, for example, this Noble Lord in the starter set, if we select him as our warlord, we get to use the Supremacy ability. Obviously, 100 Kingdoms get to have 2 warlords, so it could be the Noble Lord and the Imperial Officer, but all of the other factions can only pick 1. So it's a good idea to just try and understand what your supremacy ability for the Warlord does, because the rest of your army should be not so much built around it completely, but at least synergizing it with a little bit. So your character here gives infantry regiments rerolls on defense and attacks, so it makes sense for you to have a lot of infantry, and this list does. If you took the Noble Lord on foot and then just made it a complete cavalry army except for the one household guard regiment that he's joining, that wouldn't make a very good use of his supremacy abilities. So again, when you're picking a faction, you're building your army list, you're planning your purchases, you're gonna order a massive number of miniatures from Parabellum or whichever retailer is going to be doing it. If you've taken a lot of regiments that just have like no synergy at all with the character's supremacy in your army, you might be a bit disappointed about that later. You may have a couple of regrets. You'll still be able to build a decent list. Like, you can't go too far wrong with it. I'm going to tell you that now. But you may just find yourself feeling a bit more pleased and satisfied with the decision to plan that a little bit better by just sort of reading the ability of the main character that's going to lead your army and just seeing what can be added to that to synergize. And look, a lot of them are very generic. Like, if you play Wadroon, that's the Orc faction, the Chieftain can give everybody shock, which is a small bonus when you charge. So pretty much every unit in the Wadroon faction is going to be charging at some stage. However, you could be taking a lot of range units too. So if you just decide to just take lots of hunters with their javelins and their slingers and they're slinging rocks and they're all just shooting an entire gun line, and then you realize that the character leading the army is actually, helping you to charge rather than doing anything else, you may not have planned particularly well there. So just putting it out there that could be a bit of a thing. Okay, one other point about building lists is that when you, again, are planning your first army, it's not a bad idea to have a little bit of range. So in this list, we've got a little bit of crossbows, some rangers there, and some hunter cadres. So that's actually quite a lot of range, but not too much. We have some cheap light infantry here in the form of these militia bowmen. Then we have some heavy stuff like this Steel Legion unit, big massive unit of 6. That's going to be our little finishing move in-game unit, and it's going to benefit from the Noble Lord and the Imperial Officer. So it's kind of balanced out. We have some fast stuff in the form of the Household Knights. We can buff them up as well with our faction ability veterans if we want to. So we've got a variety of troops there. A couple of reasons why I'd recommend, having a diverse variety of troops rather than just trying to go for a skew list right off the bat and just take lots of one particular unit type. That I know it seems kind of cool, it seems kind of like unique and makes you like the player that does that, and that gives you a sense of character and identity and defines you in your little community. But two problems. First of all, it's going to result in you learning the game at a slower pace, because you're going to be constantly using this one type of unit and you're going to be doing this one thing with them, and you're not going to be experiencing a diverse variety of rules that you're in control of. And the second thing is that when you eventually master the game, when you become very, very, very good at it, you're going to be winning tournaments off the back of your really, really good decisions rather than your decision to run one particular army list the entire time. Other people are going to figure out how to beat that particular style, and they're going to counter it, and they're going to plan for it, and you're going to be regretting that decision. So yeah, I'm drawn to the idea of a skew list as well. Like, when I think about my own collection, I play 100 Kingdoms. I'm collecting Dueling at the moment. I really want to have like a separate army where it's just very focused and purity of purpose and only doing one thing with a couple of different regiment types, because that's cool. But it's just not a very good way to start. It's better to have a diverse variety of light, medium, and heavies, ranged and shooting. Some really expensive units just focus with your points, and then some really inexpensive units as well. That's just typically a good way of doing it. Okay, shall we just talk about characters and items real quick? So you will notice in this sample list, don't take this as a good sample list. I'm just sort of talking about the mechanics of list building more than anything. One thing a new player is going to have to encounter is the decision about what items to add. And the tips and the advice that I'd give here is that when you're starting, look for items that you understand, that you know, that you can read it and you can know what it does. So finite state apparatus, for example, gives you the draw event. Finite state apparatus, it allows your character to count as a wizard, but the character doesn't actually have any spells, so why would you use that? As an experienced player, I personally know why you would put that in your list. It's to give you something called spell interference. It helps you against enemy spells when you don't have a spellcaster of your own in your army, but we do have a spellcaster, so we may not need it as much. but it's more of a nuanced thing. Like that's an ability that you put in your army if you are list building in a very careful and prepared way, and you have particular opponents in mind. And there are going to be some games where that particular item just isn't really useful at all. So what I recommend you do when you're starting out with your list building is to look for items that are just going to be very helpful every game. And they're usually defensive items. This Standard of Steel, for example, just means that you have Dread that turns off Inspired. So the idea behind this is that anytime you're fighting in close combat, your opponent's regiment can't get the +1 to clash from Inspiring. So this item is just very likely to be useful. It's very likely to come up. Your expected value in return from that item is going to be very, very good. When it comes to Retinue, for example, you can't take that flag unless you take a Tactical Retinue, I think it is. Let me just get rid of this. There is an upgrade you can take called Tactical Tier 1 is what I'm looking for. This is a pretty common one amongst factions, so most of the factions you can play are going to have access to something that grants Indomitable. It just simply means that every time your regiment takes a morale check, you pass one of them. That can also be useful for combat withdrawals and clean reforms and stuff. This isn't going to come up very much, but taking morale checks is. So this is a really good example of where, like, if you're not sure where to spend your points, putting a little bit in Tactical 1 to have, like, Indomitable on units is just really useful, because your opponent's primary way of destroying you is going to be charging units into your units and killing your stuff, and you're going to be taking morale checks unless you're undead, unless you're playing the Old Dominion faction. So it's the kind of upgrade that you can't really go wrong with. It's very unlikely you'll play a game where you don't get to use it at all. And there are going to be a lot of games where it just keeps coming up and you're like, oh, I passed this one, and you attack me again. Oh, I passed again. So you just get so much more value for it, and it's only 10 points. It's used by inexperienced players as well as experienced players. Just a very good upgrade. Anything else that gives you bonuses to defense, that allows you to reroll things, is always really, really good. With your Spellcaster, for example, Focused is a really basic one that allows you to reroll a couple of spellcasting rolls. I mean, your Spellcaster is going to be wanting to use its spells all game, like every turn, and being able to reroll 2 dice every time you cast a spell is just gold. Whereas these other abilities, may come up situationally. So they're more for the experienced list builder. That's something you can graduate to later. But again, the main piece of advice is not to try and look for exotic abilities that feel like they could be useful maybe and have a lot of potential. Just start out with unit upgrades that you can see are going to have a really useful effect, most of the time in most of the games that you're going to play. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, maybe let's just dive into a little bit of a explainer here on Tabletop Simulator. I have another video on my table about how to use, another video on my channel, I meant to say, about how to use Tabletop Simulator. It's a pretty fun and cool way of playing online and testing things and just really getting a feel for another faction before you branch out to them, that kind of stuff. So one experience that you're going to have when you get into Conquest and play your first game is that it's going to be the start of the game, and the very first thing you do with your opponent after you've sort of talked about terrain and army lists is you're going to be laying out all of your light regiments. So in this sample army list over here, we've got longbowmen, we've got militia bowmen, mounted squires, crossbowmen, another unit of crossbowmen. So this particular list is very heavy on the light regiments over here. My sample list for Wadroon on this side has fewer of them. There's Raptor Riders, Hunting Pack. I think Hunters are medium. I can't quite remember. I'll have to look that up. But the main point is that the 100 Kingdoms over here have fewer of them. That doesn't really matter that much. It kind of matters, for more competitive games with picking up objectives more quickly. But the idea is that you are going to get to pick one of these cards to come on automatically. And you'll notice that I've added the character to a couple of these, and that's because the character is attached to that regiment. You don't roll for the character separately, you just roll for the regiment that the character is in, and if you bring that unit on, the character comes on with it. So with that in mind, one really good choice for which unit comes on automatically is a unit that contains a character, because then you can bring it on and do stuff with the regiment and the character that contains, and then you can make some rolls for the rest of them. So initially light units come on a 4 or less, so we get to roll 5 dice now, 1 for each light regiment, not including the character, because again you don't roll for them. So I pick up 5 dice, I roll a bunch of dice, and let's say I get 3 rolls of 4 or less, and then there's a couple of 5s and 6s. So I've got to choose a couple of units that don't come on. So again, it's useful to have the officer on the field because A, he can be useful for scoring, we'll talk about that later, and B, you know, he can give his unit a bit of a function with his special ability. The mounted squires, I'm going to leave them off, and I'm going to leave the longbowmen off, but bring these ones on. So a couple of reasons why you might sort of think that way. So one reason for leaving the mounted squires off the table is that they're incredibly fast. They are speed 9, so they can readjust to your position. So if we think about it, this unit of mounted squires here, if they just come on here and they just wait for a little while, you get to see where your opponent deploys their stuff, and it only takes you 1 turn to move, you know, from one spot in the battlefield over to the other because they're just so quick. So if your unit is very, very fast, there's no need to bring them on straight away because, you know, just bringing them on and bringing them on the maximum distance and just charging them over here and then charging them straight into your enemy, it's just going to get them killed. That's the only thing it's going to do because your opponent can bring on range units next to them, spellcasters next to them. They can bring on a unit after you've moved your horses, and then in the next turn they might win the supremacy roll and just charge you, in which case you die. So it's just squandering a unit that would otherwise be very, very useful. So they don't need to come in straight away. Longbowmen, the thing about them is that they have very long range, and what you might be able to do with them is just wait a bit to see where your opponent's units are, and then march them up and just camp them somewhere that they can get that really long range from. So it's about threat range. The horses are really fast, the longbowmen shoot a really long way, so they're a bit more forgiving with where you can deploy them in some respects, whereas these guys, they're just going to be stuck in their part of the battlefield for a little while. So that can be a reason why you may choose to bring a unit on or bring it or leave it off. I will also make the comment that when you have the right to bring on a regiment automatically, like you point to that card and say, I'm bringing that unit on automatically, I don't have to roll for it. You could also use that entitlement to prevent that regiment from coming on at all. So you can sort of point to that one, say that one is not going to be rolled for. I'm going to put them to one side and we'll talk about it next turn. And for all of the other units, I will now roll for them. And that may seem a bit counterintuitive because it feels like intuitively this game is encouraging you to bring on everything as fast as you possibly can and try and outnumber your opponents before their reinforcements arrive. And that may be the thinking. But sometimes you may have a unit that is... It's so reliant on seeing where your opponent's stuff is deployed, and it really does need to come down in response to an enemy unit that you know your opponent has, that like holding it off a turn may be more beneficial than it is harmful. You can also increase what's called your reinforcement line, where as your units move out onto the table, if we have a look at the Steel Legion which are deployed out here, obviously they're going to become Steel Legion are late game units, so in a real game these guys will be coming on a lot later, but just imagine this is a unit of like men-at-arms or something. You can actually bring your units in from the side here, and I'd recommend looking at the rulebook just to see exactly how this works, but in principle having a friendly unit that's already further up the table allows you to deploy along the side table edge up to the point that your friendly unit is at, so that may allow you to sort of march around here and get behind them, get onto zones like this. And holding your unit off for a little while may be an opportunity to see that happen. It gives you the chance to move up with other friendly units first to establish that reinforcement line. You haven't committed your own unit to the back of your table at this point. You can now bring it in later from the side, and that might be a reason for holding it off the table for a little bit. Okay, now the other thing that I think new players struggle with a little bit is card order. So when you've got all of your cards ready and they're all available to you, and you've got to make a little bit of a stack with them, like what units do you activate early and what units do you activate late? This is a really wonderful thing about Conquest, and something which is sort of a bit beyond the scope of this video in the more complex strategy side of things, but I can tell you a couple of basic things. So you will know intuitively that if the turn starts like this, and you've got like a powerful unit of Steel Legion right here and some blooded from Wadrun who also pack a real punch, and they're just staring each other down, and they're both obviously within charge distance of each other. And if the Orcs win this and they charge the Steel Legion are going to get clobbered. But if the other thing happens, then these Wadroon are going to get completely wiped out. So both players are fully aware that whoever goes first is going to get a free win here and a free deletion on their opponent's unit. So what you're going to do, almost inevitably, is to put the card corresponding to the unit that you want to activate at the top of your stack. So if you win the dice roll for Supremacy, you get to activate first, you declare a charge, and then you declare a clash, and you basically wipe out your opponent's unit. So I don't really have anything more complicated to add to that. I think everybody knows why you'd want to pick that unit first if they're in a high pressure, high risk situation and you need to go first. That's the obvious thing to do. What about this situation over here though? The Blooded are not within charge range of the Steel Legion, or at least if they march and then charge. Without any sort of the Wadroon charge buffs, they're not going to be in range. And the Steel Legion, like, they can march 5, 16 inches, maybe if they roll a 6, but they're not going to be able to clash. So it's a bit of a no man's land area here. So what you may want to do here is try to activate this unit or this unit last, because what you're hoping for is that the other unit wastes their activation once it comes to the Wadroon player's turn and the Steel Legion haven't activated yet. Well, what you could do is you can move up to the objective and start scoring some points, but that'll put you in range for the Steel Legion to charge you and wipe you out. So if both players know this, then you're in a better position to activate second. Let's say the Orcs do activate first, and then they decide to just wait because they don't want to get charged, so they're going to stay out of charge range. And then it's the Steel Legion player's turn to activate. Well, they can safely move on to the objective and score. They're still quite a long way away from the Orcs, and they haven't, given the Wadroon a free opportunity to clash them without any retaliation. So that can be a reason why you go and fish out your Steel Legion unit and put them last. But you may also have another Steel Legion unit which is in better position to attack, and you may put them first. Everything else in between is, it really comes down to the actual gameplay situation. One other tip that I would like to provide here is that if you have a character with a offensive spell like this mage who's going to shoot fireballs, putting her after the unit that she's in is a good idea, because then the unit can move up, put her within range of the enemy, and then she can fire her spells. However, if you're playing a spellcaster with some sort of buff, like the Fierce Priest, maybe it wants to be in front of the unit, because that way you activate him first, put Blessed on the Militia to give them rerolls, and then they attack. So having him earlier on in the stack is better if you're going to be supporting your unit with buffs. But if you need to get in range, and your unit that's carrying you needs to get you there first, it makes more sense to put the mage there later. And again, if your opponent has to activate to come forward first before you even have that threat range available to you, these guys might be like very late in your stack, because you're hoping that if your men-at-arms, like, where's the actual men-at-arms unit? If your men-at-arms are over here and the enemy Blooded is like way over here, and you're thinking, gosh, the men-at-arms can move forward 10 and then the mage can shoot like 14, so they're going to need to be within 24. Well, if the Blooded are back here, you're really going to be wanting to wait for the Blooded to activate first so that they march up, for example, 10 to get into the battlefield. Then it's your turn, you march up with your men-at-arms, and then you activate your mage, who can now shoot the Blooded and hit them with a nasty fireball. So it's thinking ahead like that, which is usually going to determine how your card stack is ordered. But what I will say is that as you gain a bit more familiarity with your faction and your army list and the abilities, that's really going to have more of an effect on your card stack order. I can't really cover everything in the scope of this video because it's quite a complex subject, and so it should be. This is what constitutes the main strategic aspect of the game, and that's what makes it intriguing and fun and worth having competitions about. Okay, so that's card stack order. Next up, I just want to talk briefly about unit positioning and being charged, etc., etc. So why don't we just have a look at my little example here again. Let's pretend that you know that you need to move within range of this unit of Blooded, okay? And you've got your men-at-arms over here. If you move up and stop there, then when the Blooded charge you, they are going to get a free wheel, so that this edge of the movement, the unit is going to move around to exactly there. So they're going to end up looking like that with their free wheel. Then they have to charge exactly further forward like that. They have to do it like that. They have to stop there. But then they get another free wheel to close the door, so they are going to maximize their frontage, and the Wadroon player is forced to end their regiment exactly there, right? So by positioning your men-at-arms there, you're determining where the enemy is going to be positioned at the end of that. What I want to teach you is this. How about if you move up your men-at-arms and then you face yourself like that? So what this means is that if we look at the arc and the facing, this unit here is facing like that, and they still have the Wadroon in the front arc. So if these blooded eventually charge in, they're going to have some free wheels, and they're going to line up like that. So that's where they end up. But what if you happen to have a Steel Legion unit waiting, like right here? That exposes the flank to the Steel Legion. You see that? So if the blooded are back here, and your men-at-arms are like right over here, and you move up like that, and that's where you stop, that is a mistake, because the blooded are going to be in the front, and now the Steel Legion don't really quite have the same angle. Or perhaps to use a better example, if I sort of put them like this. Alright, so now the blooded come in, and the Steel Legion are in the front, so they can't quite get as many troopers in, like that. But in that same situation, if the men-at-arms stop here, cast a fireball or something, and then the blooded come in through here and charge like this, well, that's amazing, isn't it? Because the Steel Legion now charge in the flank, they clash. When you charge an enemy unit in the flank, it means that they have to re-roll successful morale checks. It just gives you a much better opportunity to obliterate them with your flanking charge. So what I'm trying to teach you there is that when you position your units and you're expecting to be attacked by enemy regiments, the facing of them and the exact positioning of them relative to your other pieces does matter, because you can set up a situation like that where your opponent is forced to be placed in a particular manner, allowing you to come in with another regiment if you're a little bit more forward thinking in that regard. Okay, the next thing we're going to move on to talk to you about a bit is missions. And again, if you're new, you're less experienced in this game, you'll want to try to better yourself and play a bit more competitively. I just thoroughly recommend asking your opponent what mission you're going to be playing before you even show up to the venue. And if you're going to a tournament, read each of these missions as you're like designing your army list, because it's free to do that. It costs very little effort, and it's going to greatly advantage you. So just understanding the mechanics of winning and losing that are going to be applied to this game that you're about to play is just massive. So you can sort of see some of the nuances about which zones can be captured and which can't. So a brief look at this scenario tells you that there's 3 zones, but if you read it carefully, you know, you can come into the game understanding that the 100 Kingdoms player can't actually get any points from this zone. They have to get the one over here, or they can go for the middle one. So there's effectively 2 zones that you can score from, here and here. And then you're protecting this one from your opponent. So when you sort of get that through your head, you can actually plan a bit better, really. So you might have some slow-moving but very defensive units back here. You might have a fast unit, moving unit that can score for sneaking around the flank. And you might just have the bulk of your army over here as well, because this is going to be the one that the game is mostly contesting through the mid-game. And there's TTS blocking me up because I spent too long here. So the point, really, is that you've gained all of that knowledge just from having a quick look at this. The other thing you can sort of check out here is exactly how many points you get for each zone, how wide they are, and whether or not you get any points for killing enemy characters, enemy regiments, enemy warlord. Some scenarios actually don't reward you for killing enemy troops at all. So that may factor into your list building in terms of how many regiments you take. If you've taken like a massive horde of guys and that you've got these small minimum sized regiments, then you're going to be giving up the maximum points. But if you have a more compact army, then the problem with that is that then you might go into a scenario where there's going to be quite a lot of zones to capture. So some of these other ones actually have quite a lot of different zones you need to spread out and actually send your army to. So if you've only got like 4 regiments total, like they're these massive Death Star regiments, then that could be more complicated. So what they've done here is they've balanced the game quite nicely by having 2 competing types of objective, really, where it's killing as many things in your army, but also you want to have a lot of things for your opponent to destroy because you need to spread them out amongst the zones. But the tip there is just really reading what's going to be happening before you do that. Okay, now that I've just reloaded TTS, let's just come back into it. You can see that obviously TTS does kick you out, but everything's autosave. There's no problem whatsoever. In the first 3 turns of the game, you're generally bringing your units onto the table and just jockeying for position. And then in turns 4, 5, and 6, I want you guys to know that that's usually where the business end of the game happens, and where typically the winning and losing happens. But the points do matter. I've seen some very close games where towards the end, like turns 7, 8, 9, and 10, is where one person's behind, but they severely catch up because they've destroyed their opponent's army, they've moved all of their scoring stuff onto objectives, and there's nothing stopping them from winning. But I've also seen some games where they just can't catch up. Despite wiping out your opponent's army, you're so far behind on points that you still lose. And it takes a bit of experience to get a feel for how that's going to happen in any particular game. But I want you guys to understand that if your opponent's not threatening you, you're not going to lose a regiment by putting it onto a zone. You should try and do that, because having your points build up later into the game will matter. It all adds up. And you might find yourself in some very close situations where you just barely win, or you just barely lose, based on your activity early in the game in turn 3 or 4, where you either got onto an objective with something or you didn't. Another thing I want to sort of teach you guys about a little bit is how some characters on the table are classified as light units, and some are medium and some are heavy. So this unit here, these guys are men-at-arms with a a mage. So that's not shown in this particular sample army list. But if we just make one, the chapter mage is light. So light regiments can't score. But if you put it in with men-at-arms, they are medium. So the cool thing about this is that if this unit moves on to a zone, although the mage can't capture it, the men-at-arms can. So you're going to get points from a zone. And again, not this zone, because that's your friendly one in this particular mission. But say this one over here. Right, but when you're on the zone, you've got 5 stands that are scoring, because the mage doesn't count. The other guys do. So if these guys jump on to contest you, these guys are also medium. But what you're doing here is you're adding up the number of scoring stands that you have. So there's 5 men-at-arms versus 3 blooded. So the 100 kingdoms come out with some points there rather than the Wadrone. What about a situation, though, where we have some militia? If I bring these guys over, so these are 5 stands of militia with a theist priest, and if we just talk about that for a second, so if I take that down to 5 stands, that's what this army looks like here. So the theist priest is medium, and the militia are light. So if we come back to this demonstration, there are 3 medium blooded there, 1 medium theist priest, and 5 militia. So what happens here? So the Wadrone have 3 mediums. There are more than enough stands contesting the objective, so the Wadrone can't score because there are too many regiments contesting, stands I mean. Over here, we have 1 theist priest who's medium, and these guys are contesting but they're not seizing. So we've got 1 medium regiment from 100 kingdoms versus 3 contesting medium units from Wadrone, so the 100 kingdoms can't score either, because it's for when it comes to seizing and scoring, you count medium and heavies. But for contesting, you count any stands whatsoever. So if you have 1,000 light regiments on a zone, which you can't physically, but if you did, your opponent could never score, but neither could you, unless you have some medium or heavies also in on that zone as well. So when you're list building, it can be quite a good idea to put a heavy or a medium character with a light regiment. Or if you want to, if you have a light character that can't normally score, putting it with a medium regiment solves that problem. And if you have a lot of regiments in your list that can do that, then it just becomes easier when you're actually going through and picking up those points. So in this list we talked about before, Noble Lord in the Household Guard, great for scoring. The Knights can also do that. The medium Imperial Officer is medium, but the Imperial Ranger Corps and the Crossbowmen aren't, so by him going into one of those regiments, so long as there's no contesting enemy units, they can score as well. These guys also scoring. The Hunter Cadre cannot, so they are going to be sort of just ranging far afield and trying to get some kills. The Priest, as we talked about, is in the militia. He's scoring. The light mage can't score, but when it's in the men-at-arms, it can score. So that gives you a large number of units that can potentially pick up points. You don't want to be in a position where your opponent just kills the one thing that you can get points with, and you've got all these other light regiments that just can't do any scoring, and you lose that way. That'll be an embarrassing way to be beaten in a game of last argument. Alright, one more thing that I want to go over in the game here is about dueling. This is something that you may come across every so often. So let's look at an example where you have these raptor riders and there's a matriarch queen or a predator on a mounted dinosaur here, and they're attacking this unit, okay? So when you draw the character's card, and note that like when the militia activate, when you draw their card, the priest can attack as well, but again, you can only attack the raptor riders, not the character. But when you draw the priest, or when the Wadroon player draws their... Sorry, I just had my cam on, so I'm just talking about this over here. So when you draw the militia, the priest can attack along with them, but you can only duel when you actually draw the character's card. That's one of the things that the character only can do. So this situation over here. Raptor riders with a mounted character, maybe a matriarch queen on the Brood of Angora, the magic item, and the priest with a militia. So let's say the priest now activates. It could cast a spell, which is usually what it would want to do, or it could do a duel. You'd never want to initiate a duel and challenge your opponent to a duel where your character is going to die, like when your opponent has the stronger combat character. So in those situations, you don't proactively declare a duel. You just decide, no, I'm going to do something else with my character. But then when it becomes the Wadroon player's turn and they activate the queen here on the dino, if they issue a duel to you and you know that she's just going to munch your priest and your priest is going to die, that's when you want to decline, which will allow your unit to be broken. If your unit is already broken and they challenge you, then you have to accept and you may lose your character. But it's a good idea, really, to have either the unit or the character activating later in the turn after their character activates so that you can rally your unit so you can avoid that situation. One reason why sometimes people take army lists with very powerful combat characters and they take the magic items that make them better at dueling is because in that situation where you have a regiment with a character fighting their regiment with a character, you can really bully them. You can make them have to decline duels, and if you break their unit and then challenge, they have to accept. You kill their character. It's a great way of just really bullying your opponent off a zone and crushing the regiment and getting a leg up in the game, and that's why some people tool their characters up. But you can also avoid that by just sort of making their character fight a unit that doesn't have a character in it, or by declining. You might have a special rule called bodyguards, which means that your unit is not broken when you decline. The Nords faction in particular are even worse when you have to duel them, because if they kill your character while your unit's broken, you get shattered. And look, that's a whole nother sort of rabbit hole for you Nords enthusiasts to go down and understand. But I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of tips here about dueling. Is that, again, if your opponent is asking you to duel them, usually the rule of thumb is that you say no, because your opponent would only be doing that if it's to their advantage. They are not going to be handing you an advantage, right? And you would only ask your opponent to duel you if your character is better than theirs. Like, it's not a spellcaster, it's a combat character, right? So bear that in mind. It's almost like, somebody told me that in a board game like Backgammon or whatever it is, there's like a thing that you have to agree to enter into, like a particular game state, and you should, if your opponent asks you should do it, you should always say no, because like if your opponent is proposing something that they need your agreement for in a strategy game, they're never going to propose that unless it's to their advantage. Like, let's say you're playing Monopoly and they want to sell you some houses or hotels or something. Typically, I mean, either the game's forcing them to do that, in which case it is to your advantage, but if they're not in a bad state and they're just really trying to get the better of you, you should typically say no, and the same works with duels for Conquest, right? Cool, so hopefully you guys enjoyed my little strategy and tips, tactics video. Hopefully this will help you just understand the game better and feel a bit more confident in your games. The very last thing I will say to people who are learning and who are sort of struggling with winning matches is just have the mindset that when you get to the end of your game and it results in a win or a loss for you, regardless of whether you win or lose, it's better to try and identify what was it mechanically that happened in the game that produced the result. A lot of people instinctively and emotionally just go directly to, oh, it's the army list, oh, it was the dice rolls. Those two things come up all the time in wargaming nerd conversations. But the best players, the best strategic players that rise to the top and win the tournaments are the people who are able to identify that, oh, it's because over here, there was an opportunity to move this regiment onto a zone and score, or there's an opportunity to move it away out of charge range of an enemy unit, and that allowed more time for something else to happen. Just things like that. It's just the mechanical stuff that results in an advantage going to one player or another, that, you know, if you get good at identifying that stuff and thinking about that stuff and not being distracted by the emotional feelings of, oh, my opponent's faction is so overpowered, oh my god, I can't believe I lost the supremacy roll 3 times in a row, or I failed all those armor saves. Thinking about that stuff and dwelling on that stuff and trying to save face when you're talking to your friends about, oh, well, I lost, but it was because of this. If you're trying to save face as a result of that, it's not going to help you improve in terms of actually sort of understanding the real reasons why a game was won or lost. And that would be my main tip to finish off this video. If you guys enjoyed this, please consider liking the video and subscribing. I have a lot of bat reps on my channel and a lot of Conquest content, so do check it out. And I'll see you in the next one.